The roar of the engine shattered the quiet of the night, and the sleek black sports car skidded across the empty street. Papers flew out of his briefcase, his phone slid across the leather seat, and he slammed the brakes just in time. He leaned back, heart pounding, and muttered, "Damn it. Not again." It wasn't the first time. Lately, life seemed to be moving faster than he could handle. He should have been celebrating, counting the zeros in his bank account, but instead he felt a strange hollow weight pressing against his chest. He, Daniel Kairo, once a name that turned heads in boardrooms, now felt like a man barely holding on to his empire. "Yo, Daniel," his assistant's voice came through his Bluetooth. "The investors are online too. They're furious. Tell them I'll call back in 5, he snapped, running a hand through his hair. 5 minutes turned into an hour. 5 hours. By the time he finally faced them, the storm had already begun. He remembered the day he first tasted real success. Barely out of his 20s, he had taken a risk most wouldn't dare. Borrowed money, sleepless nights, deals negotiated in smoke-filled rooms and cramped apartments. He had built his electronic startup from scratch, turning it into a tech giant in under a decade. Every milestone, every award, every news headline shouting his name. He swallowed it all with a grin that felt like it could pierce through the clouds. "Daniel, you're unstoppable," friends had told him. And he believed it. He believed he had beaten the system, outsmarted fate itself. But somewhere along the way, that belief became arrogance. Pride, a shield that blinded him to reality. "Everything's fine," he said to himself as he walked into the penthouse he called home, though lately the term felt ironic. The city lights reflected on the glass walls, but he barely noticed. His mansion was full of luxuries, yet it had never felt lonelier. "First time here?" a voice asked from behind him. It was Mark, one of his old friends, someone who had known him before the billions, before the cars, the yachts, the jet-setting life. Daniel forced a smile. "Mark, good to see you." Mark's eyes didn't lie. They were sharp, knowing. "You look tired, man. I've been hearing things. The company, the investors. You know you can't ignore reality forever." Daniel laughed, a short, brittle sound. "Reality? I make reality, Mark. I don't follow it." Mark shook his head and left without another word. Daniel stood by the window, watching the city breathe, thinking he was untouchable. Weeks passed, and the cracks started showing. The market shifted, investors became cautious, and competitors he had laughed at now surpassed him. Still, Daniel's pride refused to bend. "You need to diversify," his financial advisor pleaded one afternoon, a serious look etched across his face. "The industry is changing. You can't just rely on the same products, the same deals. You need a plan B." Daniel's laugh echoed off the marble walls. "Plan B? My plan A built this empire. I don't need a plan B. I am the plan." The advisor left quietly, muttering under his breath. But Daniel didn't care. His days were a blur of meetings, champagne, parties, and the endless parade of people who clung to him for a taste of his fortune. At one of his extravagant parties, a young entrepreneur approached him. "Daniel, I've been following your work for years. You're legendary." Daniel smiled, taking a sip of expensive whiskey. "Legendary? I'm just getting started." And he truly believed it. Then the first warning came. A major investor pulled out unexpectedly. The stock began to dip, though only slightly at first. Daniel waved it off during a board meeting. "It's just a small fluctuation. Nothing we can't handle," he assured everyone, his voice steady, confident. But inside, there was a flutter of unease he quickly smothered. Days later, more bad news arrived. A competitor launched a revolutionary product, and customers began shifting. Daniel's flagship products were suddenly outdated. Orders fell. Employees whispered in corners. Rumors spread. But Daniel, as always, dismissed them. "Temporary setbacks," he said to himself. "Nothing permanent. I've faced worse." Yet he hadn't. Not like this. One night he sat alone in the dark penthouse, the city lights mocking him like distant stars he could no longer reach. He picked up his phone and saw dozens of missed calls, urgent texts, and news alerts flashing with alarming headlines. Tech giant faces unprecedented losses. Billionaire's empire in danger. Daniel Kairo's fortune at risk. A lump formed in his throat. He swallowed hard. "No, this can't be real," he whispered. His assistant called again. "Daniel, we need you. The board wants answers." Daniel rubbed his temples. He could feel the panic rising, but fought it down. He had always been in control. Always. Tell them I'll handle it," he said, his voice trembling slightly. Days turned into nights, nights into endless calls, meetings, and negotiations that felt like battlefields. But every strategy he tried crumbled. Investors lost faith. Partners betrayed him. Creditors came knocking. One evening, his wife, someone who had once stood proudly beside him, approached him, her eyes soft but firm. Daniel, I can't do this anymore. You've changed. It's not just the money. You've lost yourself. He tried to argue, tried to convince her that everything would be fine, that he would reclaim his empire. But she shook her head. I can't wait for a miracle that may never come. I'm leaving. Her words cut deeper than any financial loss. The empire he had built with sweat and genius began collapsing in front of him. Bank accounts frozen, assets liquidated, companies sold off. Headlines mocked him. Former allies whispered. Friends vanished. He wandered the streets he once commanded, the cars, the penthouses, the yachts. All gone. He walked past a cafe where he had once held a business lunch with an investor who had laughed at his ambition. Now the laughter felt like echoes mocking him. Was it all worth it? He muttered to himself. A homeless man sat nearby, holding a cardboard sign. Daniel ignored him at first, then paused. Something in the man's eyes mirrored his own despair, a reflection of what it felt like to be powerless. A week later, Daniel returned to the only place that still held memories of his rise, the tiny electronics shop where he had started. Dust coated the counters, and the air smelled of old circuits and solder. He ran his fingers over the counter and remembered the nights he had stayed awake, fixing machines, negotiating deals, dreaming of a future he eventually got, and lost. A young man approached, timid but curious. Excuse me, are you Daniel Kairo? Daniel smiled faintly, almost bitterly. I was. Now I'm just someone learning again. The young man's eyes widened. Wow, you were a billionaire? Yes, Daniel admitted, and now I'm not. But I've learned things money could never teach me. He looked at the boy, then at the empty street beyond. The lesson was heavy, tangible, suffocating. Pride had been his weapon, his crown, and eventually his prison. Here I want you, the viewer, to pause for a moment. Can you imagine a man who had everything, losing it all? What would you do if you were him? Comment below and share your thoughts. And if this is your first time on this channel, make sure you hit that subscribe button, and don't forget to like and share this story so more people can learn from it. Daniel walked out of that old shop and into the cold night. The street was quiet, except for the low hum of distant traffic and the flickering neon sign of a bar across the road. He stood there for a moment, hands in his pockets, staring at his reflection in the glass window, a reflection that barely looked like him anymore. His face carried lines of exhaustion, not age. His eyes no longer burned with ambition, but with disbelief. He thought of all the nights he used to spend here when success was only a dream. Back then, hope had been his fuel. Now, regret was his shadow. A car stopped near him. It wasn't the kind he used to drive, but still sleek enough to sting his pride. A young man stepped out in a tailored suit, phone pressed to his ear, voice sharp and confident. Sell it all before morning, the man said, walking past him. We can't afford another drop. Daniel froze. The words cut deep because they sounded like something he once said. He wanted to stop the man, to tell him, slow down, be careful. You're not invincible. But he didn't. He simply watched the car fade into the distance, as if watching his younger self speed toward the same wall he had crashed into. He turned and began walking aimlessly. His feet led him to a bridge overlooking the city, a place he hadn't been in years. The lights shimmered across the water like broken promises. He leaned on the railing, breathing in the cool air, and whispered, "What did I do wrong?" A voice beside him answered softly, "Maybe you stopped listening." Daniel turned. It was Mark, the old friend he had pushed away. His hair was grayer now, but his eyes still carried that same calm wisdom. "Mark," Daniel said, voice trembling, "you heard?" "Everyone heard," Mark replied. "It's everywhere." He paused. "I tried to reach you. You didn't answer." "I couldn't," Daniel muttered. "I didn't know what to say." Mark stood beside him, silent for a while, both men staring at the city that once bowed to Daniel's name. "You remember what you told me years ago?" Mark said quietly. "I make reality. I don't follow it. You built a world where no one could tell you no, but the truth is we all answer to something. Time, change, consequence." Daniel swallowed hard. "You think it's too late?" Mark shrugged. "For money? Maybe. For meaning, never. Those words stayed with Daniel as he walked home that night. He had no chauffeur, no security guards, no reporters waiting outside. Just silence. For once, it didn't scare him. Weeks passed. Daniel tried to rebuild, but this time not with grand gestures or expensive plans. He started volunteering at a local community center, teaching small business owners how to avoid the mistakes he made. The irony wasn't lost on him. Once a billionaire teaching people how not to lose everything. One afternoon, during a session, a young woman raised her hand. "Mr. Kairo," she said softly, "you talk about failure like it's a teacher. But doesn't it hurt to lose so much?" Daniel smiled faintly. "It hurts more than I can describe, but pain doesn't mean the lesson isn't worth it. Sometimes it's the only way we truly learn." Her eyes glistened, and Daniel realized that maybe, just maybe, his pain still had purpose. Later that evening, he walked home under a sky painted with soft gold. He passed by an electronics billboard, one that used to display ads for his company. Now it showed a competitor's logo. He stopped and stared at it, feeling both sorrow and strange peace. He whispered, "That should have been me." Then he shook his head and corrected himself. "No, that was me, but not anymore." He had finally accepted what most never do, that success is not permanent, and arrogance is the fastest way to erase everything you've built. One rainy night, as thunder rolled over the city, Daniel found himself at his old mansion. The property had been sold, renovated, and turned into a private art gallery. Through the tall glass doors, he could see the new owners hosting a party. Laughter, music, light spilling onto the wet driveway. He stood in the rain, motionless. Memories flooded in. The parties he once threw, the speeches he made, the cheers that followed his every word. Now, he was an outsider looking in. He walked closer, unnoticed, until he saw one of his old paintings on the wall, a portrait of himself that once hung in his office. He stared at it for a long time. The painted version of him smiled confidently, eyes filled with the same pride that had blinded him. For a brief second, he hated that man. Then he pitied him. A security guard approached. "Sir, the gallery's closed to the public tonight." Daniel nodded. "I know, I just wanted to see what I used to call home." The guard looked at him for a moment, recognizing the face. "You're him, aren't you?" Daniel smiled faintly. "I was." The guard hesitated, then said softly, "It must feel strange seeing it like this." Daniel looked up at the mansion one last time. "Strange? No, it feels fair." He turned and walked away into the rain, the lights fading behind him. Days turned into months. The media stopped talking about him. The world moved on, as it always does. But Daniel remained, quieter, humbler, wiser. Sometimes he'd sit by his small apartment window and watch the sunrise, remembering the days he used to wake up to luxury. Now he woke up to peace. One morning, Mark visited him again. They sat over coffee, talking about old times. "Do you ever miss it?" Mark asked. Daniel chuckled. "Every day. But I don't crave it anymore. I think I finally understand something I never did before." "What's that?" Mark asked. Daniel stared out the window, watching people hurry to work, buses honking, vendors calling out, life moving like a river that never waits for anyone. "That money can buy time, until time decides it's done waiting for you," he said. Mark smiled sadly. "You sound wiser." Daniel laughed softly. "No, just broken in all the right places." The next day, Daniel visited his mother's grave, something he hadn't done in years. He knelt, placing a small flower on the stone. "You were right," he whispered. "It was never about the money. It was about what I became chasing it." He sat there for a while, rain beginning to fall again. But this time, he didn't rush to escape it. The raindrops mixed with tears, and for once, he didn't care who saw. He had spent years running from storms, only to realize that sometimes standing in the rain was the only way to feel clean again. As he rose to leave, he glanced at the sky, gray, heavy, honest, and said quietly, "I thought I'd stay rich forever, until reality hit." He walked away, leaving only his footprints on the wet ground and the echo of his past fading behind him. And now, I want to ask you, the one watching this. If you lost everything tomorrow, your money, your fame, your comfort, what would you still have that's truly yours? Think about it. If this story touched you, leave your thoughts in the comments. What part of Daniel's journey spoke to you the most? Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe if this is your first time joining this channel. There are more stories here. Stories that remind us that success can be sweet. but reality always finds its way home.